Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. What's going on, everyone? So welcome back to part 2 of my black and white film series. If you missed the first one, what I did is I basically went out, tested 3 different film stocks, just searching for which one is best for me as someone who shot color film pretty much their entire career. So going back out today, I have 3 more to try out. Gonna look at the initial results and then jump back here on the computer, dive a little deeper. But also just want to mention, in the last video, there was an amazing discussion going on in the comments below, people sharing their experiences and advice with these films. And I hear you all loud and clear. I understand that development plays a big role in the final look of these films. And, everything today was developed and scanned at a lab again. And that's probably what I'm going to stick with for the foreseeable future, just scanning high res here afterwards for specific images. So these results today are very much for my workflow, but I would love to hear again, leave a comment below if you've worked with these films and just what your experience has been. So first up in this video is, again, a Rollei film stock. In the last video we checked out Retro 400, but today we're looking at Superpan 200. I like throwing these Rollei films into the mix as obscure choices just to kind of hang out alongside the more well-known films. Just like with the Retro 400, this film is also based off of an EGFA stock, which was intended for aerial photography. So first thing that jumped out was that the images definitely have some character to them, just like with the Retro 400, but maybe a little bit less with the Superpan. I gotta say, I did like the look, but I don't think it's something that I'd want to commit to for all of my work. Again, just not wanting to kind of bake in a strong look. The images were very sharp and not showing much grain, and the files were still flexible to edit, but I gotta say I did find the shadows to be a little bit muddy. I'll talk about that more later, and they didn't have as much room for tweaking as, say, an HP5 or a T-Max. Overall a nice film stock, but just not sure I'd pick it over others. Next up is Ilford's Delta 400, which I was very curious about. And this was a film that many people suggested I check out, so I was excited to see what it was like and if it could be a nice alternative to T-Max 400. Delta 400 is known for being a film stock that has relatively fine grain and is incredibly detailed. And I have to say the first thing that jumped out at me was how sharp these images were. The detail was just crazy and honestly a little bit too much for my liking. In the last video, I tested Ilford's HP5 and I was expecting Delta to be a lot punchier than it, but I found it actually still had quite a wide range of tones and a lot of gray, just like the HP5. Overall, not bad, but I don't think I like it as much as the T-Max, and if I were to stick with an Ilford film, I'd probably choose the HP5 over this one. Last up for this test is Kodak's TRI-X, and this is a film that I was really excited to check out. Obviously, it's a classic, and right away I gotta say I noticed that the grain on this film was definitely the most apparent, but it still had a nice quality to it. The images are still fairly detailed, but nowhere near the sharpness of the Delta, which obviously wasn't surprising and for me was very much welcomed. I was expecting this film to have a distinct look, which it does, but it isn't an aggressive look like the Rollei films and still would leave a lot of room for adjustment. I assumed I'd like this film, but I gotta say it really did grab me. Obviously a lot different than the T-Max 400, which I loved, but yeah, it may be tough for me to pick between these 2 films moving forward. Okay, so really interesting initial results. We're gonna jump on the computer here and dive a little deeper, but before we do, I just wanna take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare, which is an online community with thousands of inspiring classes for creatives. I've been on there for a few years now as both a teacher and also a student, and I found that it's a great way to not only learn new skills about photography, filmmaking, creativity, and business, but also be part of a supportive and engaging community. For photographers, they have a ton of different courses to choose from, both creative and technical, like the street and documentary photography course taught by Andre Wagner. This is a style of photography that is completely new to me, and I found the course to be really insightful and inspiring. When it comes to film photography, I actually have a course on Skillshare. It's all about shooting your first roll of 35mm film. And I also have a medium format course that's in the works that should be up in a month or two. The first 1,000 people to click the link below will get a free trial of Skillshare's premium membership. And then after that, it's only about $10 a month. Let's get back into it. Okay, so we're gonna start with the Rollei scans. And like I said, these were done on a Frontier at Carmencita Film Lab out of Spain. And for me, I'm just getting them to give me kind of a really kind of neutral scan. So not too flat, but just protecting the highlights and the shadows, giving me some room to kind of build in a look and, you know, play around with things a little bit on my end. But for this test, I did do edits to them, but I kept them all fairly minor. For the most part, they're just exposure and brightness adjustments, stuff like that, just so we can kind of get a feel for the differences between these ones. But starting off with the Rollei, so this is after, this is before, and let me jump to a couple down here, because there was one thing that was very apparent, like I mentioned earlier, with all of this, all of the images from the Superpan 200, and this is something that I noticed with the Rollei Retro 400 from the last test. So this is before. So if you look at the shadows, they have this kind of, there's not a lot of separation, there's not a lot of tonal separation, and a little bit of a, say like a flatness to them. And if we go to this next one as well, this is before, right here. And it's funny because when I saw this originally, it almost looks to me like a little bit of underexposure. But even in this scene, you know, I remember metering this one at 100 just because worrying that this bright wall was going to throw off the meter. But I started to notice this look through every image that I shot with this film. So it kind of has a little bit of this flatness to the shadows. I noticed that with the Retro 400 as well. It's maybe not as extreme with the Superpan. But the nice thing is you can kind of edit that out. So this is all going to be personal preference depending on what you like. Some people might like, you know, that look that comes with it. So this is before and this is after. So I just, you know, very quickly dug into the curves, set a black point and adjusted them a little bit. So you can quite easily bring some separation back into those shadow areas if that's what you want. But, you know, I could see some people liking this look. It has kind of a pretty unique quality to it, but not for me. But I gotta say, this film is very clean, so we'll zoom into 100% here. It's pretty detailed, pretty sharp, but just very clean as well. So if that's what you're after, this is pretty nice. And it does, you know, it does have a neat look to it, but like I said in the last video with the Retro 400, you know, for me, I would be hesitant to kind of work with a film where I'm baking in a little bit of a look to the film. I would rather shoot with something that has a little bit more flexibility and I'm not kind of locked into one specific quality of the film for all of my images. So even though you can edit out and bring some separation into these shadows, this film stock still definitely does have a look that sticks with it. I do like it, I gotta say, and I probably will shoot a little bit more of it in the future, but I don't think I would kind of work with this film for an entire project. But this one's actually, this is probably my favorite image from all of the rolls that I shot. And this is a good example. So this is after with the edits, and this is before. So you'll see again, down here, the shadow areas are very flat, but you can quite easily bring some separation back into those tones and the shadows. So yeah, cool film. Probably shoot it again, but I don't think I'll stick with it moving forward. And obviously here's this scene. This is like a staple in my videos. This is super close to my house. So whenever I'm going out to shoot, I just stop here. And it's almost like one that I can kind of shoot with every film and keep coming back to it, even though obviously different lighting conditions and stuff. But this was one of the only overcast ones from this roll of Superpan, but you'll see that this film still does have quite a bit of room for flexibility, you know, scanned on the Frontier. These files allow you to kind of tweak them a little bit, and they hold up pretty well. So I'd say the Superpan is a little bit more flexible than the Retro, just based off of, you know, getting it done at a lab on a Frontier, but cool film. I don't think I would stick with it, but that's not really surprising. Like I said, these Rollei films were kind of just a random last minute choice to throw something different into the mix. Okay, onto the Delta. So like I said earlier, the first thing that jumped out at me with this film was just the detail and the sharpness. And you can see here, it's just incredibly detailed. Too much for my likings, and for that reason, I probably wouldn't shoot the Delta moving forward. It is a nice film, but just for my preferences, I'd prefer something with a little bit of a softer look, which kind of the TRI-X provides, and I'll get into that after. But the interesting thing is, the last test, the T-Max, is really what kind of won me over. I really enjoyed that film, and I'm going to work with it moving forward. So I was curious to try the Delta, just being a 400 speed, and I was assuming that this film was going to be a little bit punchier than it is, maybe similar to the T-Max. But I gotta say, I was quite surprised to see, just like with the Ilford HP5, that film had a lot of gray to it, a lot of midtones, not that contrasty. The Delta has more of a look, but it does have a lot more kind of gray in it than I expected. For some reason, I was just assuming it was gonna be similar to the T-Max in terms of how much kind of punch it had. So this is before, and this is after, but still a nice film stock. And that's the thing, is trying all these different films, there's bound to be a handful that are going to be, probably be fine working with. So it's interesting to kind of narrow these down. Still does have a nice look to it. Here's that same scene from before. Obviously, this is once the clouds rolled in. So one more here. So I really actually like the look of this scene. This is just minimal adjustments, brightness, exposure. But, with these scans that I got back, with the Delta, there still is a lot of room to kind of tweak these files afterwards. Obviously, as you get extreme like that, this is just super heavy-handed, really quick. But there is a lot of room for adjustment still, so you could, work with a film like this and tweak things to your likings. But yeah, overall, just a really sharp, detailed film. If that's what you're after, this seems like it would be a great choice, but probably not for me moving forward. And I got a question for all of you. I posted this on my Instagram, but the funny thing is I shot the scene because I'm like, had a cool old car in here. And then when I got the scans back, I'm like, how did this thing get in here? So answer me that. How did this wall appear here in this car's back here? Okay, so moving on to the TRI-X, and I was excited to work with this film. Obviously, it's a classic. It has a huge history behind it, and it won me over very quickly, and I would say it's up there with the T-Max, and those are probably the two films I'm going to explore a little bit more moving forward, but they really couldn't be any more different. So the first thing that stood out to me with this film is just the apparent grain. So a lot of grain, but it has this really nice quality to it, that just gives the images a nice look. And also, a lot of gray in these images. There is a look to it, and the HP5 from the last test that I shot, I found that film to be pretty flat, a lot of gray, a lot of midtones, a lot of room for flexibility, which in a way is nice. But this film, it's almost like a middle ground between the look of the HP5 and the T-Max. I find the TRI-X has a little bit more kind of punch to it. I know with the HP5, it all depends on, how you develop it and things like that, and there are ways to change that. But, just with the workflow that I'm working with right now, the TRI-X kind of brings with it this really nice kind of quality to it. Not too much of a look, but there is something there, just this feel to it that's kind of baked in that isn't heavy-handed or anything like that. Still fairly detailed as well, but nowhere near the Delta, which obviously, like I said, for me is a good thing. A little bit softer. But it does have a nice feel to it. And, these files still are, very tweakable. These scans that I got back, they hold up pretty well if you want to kind of adjust things to your liking. This one's the before, this is the after, just light tweaks here on my end. Jump down here to this one. And yeah, these last couple images, I really enjoy this look. And I'm excited, I gotta say, to work with this film moving forward. So this is before, this is after. And I think, what I'm learning with all of these films, a lot of them are capable of producing very different looks. But it's interesting just to see these kind of subtle qualities that certain ones have. And I think for me now, moving forward, it's, taking the T-Max, taking the TRI-X, these two films that I really enjoy, and just going out and working with them more, maybe experimenting a little bit, pushing, pulling, stuff like that, just getting a feel for them a little bit more and finding out which workflow really kind of suits me best. But, two very different films so far, and I'm not sure which one I would choose over the other because they are both very nice, but I just got to shoot some more with it because, the TRI-X I've shot 2 rolls, the T-Max I've shot 2 rolls, so it'll be cool to experiment a little bit more moving forward and see which one grows on me. So overall, very interesting results. You know, not surprising that the TRI-X kind of won me over out of these three. So moving forward, you know, this film and the T-Max are ones that I'm gonna kind of dive a little deeper into and just see how they work for me. But do have a third video coming up from this series. Have a few more films to test out, slower speed ones, probably ones that I'm not gonna stick with, but could be cool just to try them out and see what they're like. So keep an eye out for that. But just wanna say, as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate all the support, all the comments, all that kind of stuff, and I'll talk to you soon.